Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Rigor Mortis podcast. My name is Adam, and again with me this week, time after time, we got my friend Jason.
How are you today, Adam?
I'm doing pretty good, buddy. How are you?
Better than I deserve.
Yeah, I hear that.
Absolutely.
So, what brings us back to the recording studio?
That time of the week, I guess. What story are we doing today?
We're going to be doing the story of Kyle Brytus. Now, this was a listener-suggested one.
Yeah, actually, what's interesting about this is not only was it a listener suggestion, but it was actually brought to us by Kyle's mother, Lynn Krieger.
Yes.
So it's a little different than most of these stories where, we find something we think is interesting. We do a lot of research. We have a lot of direct knowledge of this case, right from his mother.
Correct, and it's definitely one of those that kind of hits home maybe a little bit harder. Right now I'm doing some research for us on Carl Panzram, which happened in 1920s and 1930s. I mean, you can relate to it to some degree, but not like when you're on YouTube looking at a video with somebody's mother in it that you're corresponding with through email.
Right. It's definitely hits home a little more. And we're both right around the age that Kyle was when he passed away.
Yeah, I'm only a couple of years older than him.
Yeah, we were born. I believe we were born in the same year. So
yeah, I
can kind of relate to some of the things that he was going through and whatnot. And
yeah, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah,
you know
absolutely.
What I mean? Even the hard times that Kyle's had. I mean, if you haven't experienced it yourself, you certainly have known others that have.
Right. Kyle, he grew up like any normal American kid. He lived with his single mother, whose basically her whole sole purpose was raising her little boy. Yeah,
I definitely get the feel that Kyle was everything to her.
Right, and it was from what I gathered, it was kind of a pretty close family. I mean, Kyle was fortunate because his mother's name's Lynette. We're gonna refer to her as Lynn.
Yeah,
but her parents actually lived, pretty close to the family. So, he had a male influence in his life through his grandfather and whatnot, and always had that sense of family that's so important at a young age.
Yeah, he seemed like he always had somebody to turn to. They would take him fishing. They would his grandfather would take him mining for gold when he got a little bit older.
Yeah, he really had a great childhood from everything that I understood.
Right. And when Kyle was 7, his mother, Lynn, married Gary, his stepfather. And Gary was up for the task of being a stepfather. Like we've said in other episodes, I think referring back to like Lacey Peterson, some guys just are great stepfathers,
Yeah.
And they do assume that role very well. And it sounds like this is the kind of guy that was there also for Kyle as a role model and as a father figure.
Yeah, he treated him just like he was his own kid, which it's great for Kyle at this age to have the stable family and father figure and everything that he had been dealing with at that time.
Because he had that kind of a home structure, it did allow for him to flourish academically and on the sports field as well.
Yeah, he was very smart from what I got. He really didn't struggle too much in school. He loved to read. He was always ahead of his class in gifted and talented programs, things like that. And also was very well liked by his peers. Sometimes you see people who like to read and whatnot, don't fit in as well. But he didn't have that problem at all. He was very, very involved.
He was quick-witted even as a second grader when he was nominated for class president. He even, his mother was telling us that...
this was actually really cool.
Yeah.
Because I don't remember doing class president and whatnot when I was really young.
I don't either.
But it's cool because there was an election going on. So it was more of like a current event class, I guess.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure which election this would have been. If I had to guess, I'd probably say 96.
I would assume, yeah. But he was able to win that election by bribing his classmates with candy like a true politician.
Man, the potential he showed.
Yeah. So he breezed through elementary school, and he went on to middle school. And this is when he joined the soccer team and played in a band. So starting to grow up.
Yep, doing the extracurricular activities and things like that. Around the time he got to the high school age, he really wanted to go to Fort Myers High School. I'm not sure. His mom kind of explained this to us. This isn't how it is where we live.
Well, it is in some towns where you have a number of towns or districts, and the town that I live in right now, not to get too personal, I guess, but my kids have a choice which school they can go to.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, because it's multiple towns, and so even though we live in one town, my youngest goes to school in a neighboring town.
Interesting. But he
Yeah.
has an option to go to a different
Yeah, we
school?
could have picked, but the one in the neighboring town's actually closer.
Right, right.
So this actually is fairly common.
See,
So
that's interesting because where I'm from, like, we have two elementary schools, literally like a mile from each other. And if you're on the left side of the street, you go to one elementary school, and if you're on the right side of the street, you go to the other one. So it's like your neighbor can go to a completely different school than you. It's really weird. But I guess he was able to have this choice in high
yeah.
school.
Now Kyle could have taken the IB programs, and this would have guaranteed him a spot at the Fort Myers High School.
Right, right.
And what is an IB program? I didn't know what that was.
I looked it up. It was the International Bachelorette Program. It's available for 16 to 19-year-olds. And from what I understand, it's essentially taking higher classes to get some college credits, I guess.
Is it? Yeah, I was gonna say, is it kind of like here, like when I was in high school, some of the kids had the option to go on to Bates College for some programs. You know what I mean? Is something like that, you think?
It is. It is. It's. I'm not sure. I'm sure it's probably core classes, math, science, things like that you need for credits and able to graduate with degrees or whatnot. But he actually had decided not to enroll in this program and go to Fort Myers because he decided he didn't really want to work that hard. He wanted to enjoy his high school life and not have all that stress on him, which is completely understandable.
I was just, when I was reading this, I was thinking, I don't blame the kid. High school is such a short period of time. Enjoy it. You know what I mean?
It's tough too because like I had friends in high school that were in some of these programs, and some of them went on to do great things, but they didn't have much of a high school life. I mean, a normal high school student has maybe 2 hours of homework. A lot of times these students will have 4 or 5 hours of homework.
Yeah.
So it's very tough to keep up with your extracurriculars like sports and things like that. But eventually, Kyle did decide to get into Fort Myers High School.
His mother states, looking back, she believes this could have been the beginning of the decline. Now, I wonder if this is because it's maybe a large high school, and there's all kinds of, with large high schools, you have the bigger problems, that kind of a thing.
Right, right. And he did get in a little bit of trouble his freshman year in ninth grade. He was actually caught with some marijuana. But it was all handled in the within the school system. He basically got sent to a diversion program. There was no legal action, so it seems that was his first offense. But Florida takes marijuana laws pretty seriously.
Yeah, don't get caught with a pot seed on your carpet in Florida. They'll lock you up for 5 years.
Even if you have rolling papers, if you don't have tobacco, you can get in trouble.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maine, they don't care.
Far different here in the north.
Yeah, my buddy got caught with pot one night. We used to work overnights, and we'd walk home. And my buddy got caught with pot, and the cop was like, "Yeah, I don't want to fill out the paperwork. So if you're willing to just throw it down this sewer right here, we'll call it good on that."
Yeah, and that was a few years ago. Nowadays, cop pulls you over, and they say, "What do you got in the car?" You say, "I got a little pot." They say, "Are you high?" You say no, and they're like, "Well, have a great day."
How much pot do you have? Less than 2 ounces. You're all set.
You're all set. Yeah. Anyways, though.
Yeah. Yeah, but unfortunately, he did get in a little bit of trouble for that, but nothing too serious. Nothing that isn't pretty common in high school, but. His mom states that after that she never saw any other signs of him being high or anything like that, and she was paying attention.
Yeah, she definitely was vigilant. I'm sure she knew the smell. It's a very distinct smell, and I'm sure that once this happened, she was on watch.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, when before you want to see your kid as innocent, so she may there's a skunk around somewhere, and now she's like, now if I smell that, I know exactly what it is.
You're in trouble, buddy.
Right.
In 10th grade, he started running on the track team.
Yes, he did. He asked his mom if he could join cross country, and she said yes, but it's something that if he does, he needs to be committed to, which is good advice.
You're on the team. You're on the team. And he excelled at it. He did it every year in high school from that point on.
Yeah, and he actually was captain of the team at one point and was known to be a real leader. He was a very good motivator for some of his teammates and things like that. So really sounds like the type of kid who is taking charge.
Yeah, you see somebody working hard, it makes you want to work hard. Kyle actually left such an impact at Fort Myers High School that some of his classmates still reach out to Lynette today.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they were telling her, she said that they got a hold of her to tell her stories about how good he was to them, always made them smile. If they were struggling at the end of a race, he'd be right there, encourage them to finish and things like that. But Kyle, I mean, he did a lot in his years. He actually, at this point, goes on a couple of mission trips to Central America.
Yeah, he went with his youth group from church. They would go down and they would work in orphanages. They would put on little plays, puppet shows, clown shows. And this was his first trip was soon after 9/11, so I'm sure that must have been terrifying for Lynette and his grandparents and everybody seeing him flying off to go do this. But it's definitely something that helps build character and helps turn little boys into men, to let them go out and experience these kinds of things and do these kinds of things.
Right, because at this point, he's probably 13, 14 years old, something like that. But his mom tells us interesting story at this point. He comes back from their trip, and as they're loading up the car, he has his backpack, and he pulls out this machete. She said it wasn't huge, but it was in his backpack, and she kind of is wondering how he got this, through carrying stuff like that.
Yeah, was that in his carry-on?
Yeah, I think it was, is what she said. But they had all sorts of stuff they had purchased, knives and things like that, a hanging chair, just a lot of souvenirs that he brought back. But she did say she was very curious how he got that through customs, like shortly after 9/11.
Now, Kyle graduated high school in 2006 with honors.
Yeah, I think he actually received a Bright Futures scholarship, which is a state program for people with a very high GPA. And he also received a $2,000 scholarship from the local track and field club. Ian was offered a scholarship from Florida Atlantic University, who had actually recruited him to be part of the cross-country team.
Now, Jason, did you receive any of these kind of accolades when you finished high school?
No, they asked me to leave.
Same here. They said, "Don't you go start a podcast in 15 years?"
Right, absolutely.
Anyway, so that's crazy. His parents must have been, or his mother and his stepfather must have been super proud of him. I mean, that's huge. I mean, a scholarship to a school. Wow, this kid had it together.
Yeah, he seemed like he was becoming a pretty successful young man. He was majoring in business, and the way he was with people, he just seemed like he could do anything he wanted in life.
Okay, Jason. So Kyle finishes high school. He has the summer off, and then he begins his freshman year of college.
Unfortunately, from what his mother says, this is kind of when she notices his priorities changing and things like that. The first few months, Kyle would tell his mom that nothing in life had prepared him for what college life would be like. So he didn't enjoy living in a dorm. He didn't enjoy sharing that dorm room with anybody, and he asked his mom to get him like a single room type of deal.
Yeah, this isn't uncommon. I'll tell you what, when I first started college, I felt the same way.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like everything's just, your whole world is nuts.
Yeah, and it kind of makes sense to me, too, because he tells his mom that he grew up not having to share a room with anybody. So, of course, that's different to him, and, he doesn't want to start now. So, his mom tries to kind of reason with him and tell him that it would be a good experience and that he's going to have to deal with it. It's not a lifelong situation, but, enjoy. This is part of college. Enjoy that college life. I actually went to visit my one of my friends for a Red Sox game down in Boston, and we stayed in his dorm when he was in college. There was like 9 people in one dorm room. It was huge, but like it was crazy. I was like, holy crap! Like people just coming and going all day.
It's like a pod in a prison.
Yeah, some guy was like making out with his girlfriend on his bed, like on the wall while we were on the other wall. It's weird. Just I don't blame Kyle at all for thinking that dorm life was a little different.
Unfortunately, he also stopped enjoying being on the cross-country team, and he ended up dropping off the team. Now, I don't know if that's because, expectations are a little bit greater in college, and he felt like he had to focus on his academics. That I couldn't tell you, but it is pretty common for people to do sports in high school, make it to college, and be like, you know what, I don't like this anymore. This is not for me.
Right. And I'm not sure if him dropping off the team had anything to do with drugs and whatnot. Like he had, he'd been caught with the marijuana his freshman year of high school, but his mom was very vigilant about that. But in spring of 2007, Kyle had been put on probation at school after Christmas break, and he decided it was time to go back home. So he got a job at a restaurant as a waiter, which was good because he liked that, like having that cash in his hand at the end of the day, which can be very, very gratifying, I can imagine.
And you know what? It is really crazy to ask an 18-year-old kid what they want to do for the rest of their lives.
Absolutely.
I almost feel like Kyle just needed some time to figure it out,
right. And his mom does think, looking back on the way things are now, his mom does think that he may have been using drugs during this time, but she I don't think realized the severity of it.
Now, this time when Kyle came back to live with his mother and stepfather, he had to live by their rules, and he was off in college, kind of able to do his own thing. and now he's going back under the watchful eye of his, his parents.
Yeah, yeah, and of course he didn't like that. I mean, it makes sense. You have that freedom and kind of gets reined back, but he had to follow these rules. His car was in their name, and his mother said that if he wanted to be out all night, he needed to put the car in his name and transfer insurance and things like that. So they just, they wanted to absolve themselves of any liability if anything had happened.
Yeah, I mean, that's how it was for me too.
Yep. Yeah. Absolutely. I had the same thing happen where, not drug related or anything like that, but I had moved out on my own. Never realized how difficult that would be, and after a period of time, I moved back home, and having just basic rules. Not I didn't even have severe rules, but just
Yeah.
try not to be home too late, things like that. And I'm like, I'm a 20-year-old dude. Like I will be out as late as I want to be out, and I can understand the difficulty he must have been going through there.
Just parents trying to help, their child become a man. Just
Right.
that's all there is to that.
But unfortunately, they have good reason for being like this because Kyle continued to stay out all night, and one night he was actually at a party and it had gotten raided. So, pretty serious. Pretty serious. I've never been at a party that got raided. I
Yeah.
can imagine that'd be terrifying.
I have once. I climbed over a chain link fence and ran from the police into the woods.
Oh, terrifying.
For Kyle and his friends, though, they got caught with fake IDs.
Ooh,
And
not
that's a felony in the state of Florida.
Yeah, Florida doesn't mess around with stuff like that. It's very, very, very strict state.
And it's pretty common to have fake IDs, especially when you're 19, 20 years old. But it is a big deal.
Yeah, and hopefully, I'm sure Lynn is hoping at this point that this is like a wake-up call to him.
Yeah, she did everything she could to help him. But unfortunately, 2 weeks later, Kyle gets arrested for possession of alcohol.
So didn't learn his lesson then.
Yeah, unfortunately not.
Yeah, I think it was so severe that when he got arrested the second time, the police they were kind of done with it. And because he had just been arrested for the fake ID, Lynn and Gary couldn't even bail him out.
Yeah, you know what? Which is probably a good thing in a way, because at least he got that experience in the 4 days to dry out. Because I mean, sounds like he maybe. I'm not going to say the kid had a drinking problem. We all drank a lot when we were younger.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You just can. But it maybe 4 days to sit in jail and reflect might have been a good thing.
Right, and I'm sure Lynn's mentality after the fact, just putting words in her mouth here, but she probably thought 4 days. I bet you didn't like it, but it could have been a lot longer, and next time it just might be. So a little tough love. Learn your lesson here because you don't want to be in jail for years or things like that. I mean, he's not on the right path at this point.
But with the fake ID and the possession of alcohol, he did get lucky because both cases were dropped.
Really?
Yeah, this is Florida, man. There's busy stuff going on. They're not going to prosecute every little thing.
Right, right.
So he did get lucky with that. And so he was young and his record was clean.
Well, that's good, but hopefully at least he learned his lesson at that point.
Now, Jason, because of all these recent events, Lynette was concerned, and she ends up at this point kind of tightening up the chain a little bit. They take away his car, and she starts to commute him to and from work so that she can keep an eye on what he's doing.
Right, right, and of course that's only for a period of time, and then he gets the car back for a little bit. But sometimes having to cart your kid back and forth at that age is almost more of a punishment for the parent.
In some ways, but I'm sure in her case it was the peace of mind of knowing that he was
Staying
okay.
out of trouble, things like that. Yeah.
But one night Kyle didn't come home until around 5 o'clock in the morning.
Wow.
Yeah, he said he had pulled over in a McDonald's after work, ate his food, and fell asleep. That's kind of odd.
That is a little bit odd. I mean, if he hadn't been sleeping well or things like that, but I don't think Lynn and Gary actually believed him at that point, and they actually asked him to leave.
Yeah, well, there's only so much that you can take as a person before you realize this is even too much for you.
Right, right. And Lynn says that, they gave him plenty of chances, but, nothing was constant. So it can be very, very hard and draining to have to give that tough love, but, it's probably the right thing to have done.
Oh, yeah, man. And as a mother, she would lay in bed at night just worrying and waiting for him to come home. And that's taxing on anybody.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, just constant worry and concern definitely isn't conducive to health, especially if you're the one caring. But he's off doing his thing without a care in the world.
Now Kyle ends up leaving home. He takes a bus to Boca Raton, He stays with some of his fraternity brothers, which is probably not a good thing.
Right.
He was crashing on their couch and until he could find a job and get things together.
Right, right. And at that point, he actually did get a job at an Italian restaurant. He actually worked there for quite a few years. But after a while, Gary felt bad that Kyle didn't have a car.
No, Gary's his stepfather.
Right.
Yeah.
So he actually bought him an older car. And Kyle was said to be very appreciative. And he put this in his name and paid the insurance and all that, showing a little bit of responsibility.
Yeah. He stayed in Boca Raton till 2012. At this time, Lynn had found out that Kyle did have a prescription pill problem. Lynn had learned that Kyle had been abusing OxyContin.
This is around a time where I think the pill problem in this country is really starting to get pretty bad. I mean, I know quite a few people that I went to high school with that were addicted to OxyContins and Vicodins and things like that because doctors were just prescribing them for any little pain. There's a little more strict regulations now, but, I know people that, had a foot surgery and were prescribed OxyContin because of the pain, and that's all fine and good. But, when their prescription runs out and they don't realize that they're addicted yet and they start finding other ways to get these pills, and that's not what they're meant for. They're meant for a certain amount of time and be done with it. But it's I know a lot of people who have had injuries and been prescribed prescription drugs and couldn't get away from it after.
It's totally sad. Even in this area, we've had a prescription pill problem. I can only imagine what it would be like in an area like Florida.
Right.
There's nobody here. Sometimes I get in my car and I drive to work. I don't see anybody else.
Right.
You're not going to get that in Florida. The population's just so much greater that the problem must be that much greater.
Right, and the prescription pill problem eventually became the heroin problem.
Yeah.
Which is very bad in this country. But of course, Lynn and her father and brother-in-law are very concerned when they hear this news, so they actually go try to find him.
They went to his apartment, and when they got to the door, it was opened ajar. So that's kind of like, what's going on here?
Right.
Yeah.
And they call Kyle's name, and they don't hear anything. But they walk in, and there are people like laying on the couch and on a mattress on the floor. And
sounds like that night in college that you had there visiting your friend.
Yeah.
And
it sounds like a scene out of like Breaking Bad or something, like when they're having like the meth parties and stuff.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
I mean, this must have raised so much concern for his family.
Yeah. His grandfather says that this was literally like a scene that they've seen on TV, but he couldn't believe that his own grandson was actually living like that. They actually, at that point, turned around and walked out. And as they do, Kyle was walking up the hallway. So they sit him down and talk to him. And, Kyle actually admitted everything, said he was ready to come home. Almost sounds like he's a little lost at this point.
I was going to say, I get the feel like Kyle even realizes that his life is spinning out of control. And it's no longer within his grasp. Like, he needs some help, and he's able to acknowledge that. And at this time, his family's there for him again. I mean, they help him. They pack up his things and they take him back home.
Yep. And Lynn says that she has a place for him to go, but he says he doesn't want to go. He wanted to try to be on his own, but maybe being back closer to home will give him the stability that he needs to overcome these issues.
So what he ends up doing is he stays with Lynn's parents, his grandparents. Now, they were retired, so they were with him, pretty much 24/7, able to watch him like a hawk and help him.
Right. And they say he seemed to be doing good. Kyle and his mother talked quite a bit, and, he told her some stories about the way that he had been living that basically just horrified her.
He said he was using up to 10 to 12 pills a day.
Wow.
I'm assuming that's a lot.
Yeah, and what's even worse is, taking them orally wasn't enough for him, so he was actually crushing these pills up and shooting them up in his arm.
Oh, man.
That's pretty serious. Anytime your drug problem starts involving needles, it's not good.
Now, when Kyle would come home to visit for the holidays, he wouldn't stay much more than a couple of days. And I think this is probably because he knew how concerned his family was, so he was going to stop using out front of them. And after a couple of days, he probably had that feeling like he needed it again, and he was gone.
Several times before he left to go back to Boca Raton, he would actually break out in cold sweats and say he was coming down with something, but his mom realizes now that was most likely the withdrawal symptoms.
Yeah. It's unfortunate, the stuff that you you realize in the hindsight of these tragic events, you know.
Right, right. I'm sure she looks back now and she's like, wow, if I had noticed that this is what was happening, maybe I would have done things differently, which is very, very hard. I mean, she's already going through enough,
It's
but
just hard to notice these things when you're living in the moment.
right,
You
right.
know what I mean?
But
Who does?
right, exactly. But now that he's home, she thinks that things are improving and he was doing well. He even thought it was time for him to get a job.
Lynn was hesitant to have him getting back to work, and she just didn't think he was ready. But he was getting bored.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, she's probably thinking at this time that if things are good, just keep focusing on your mental health and, beating this addiction. And don't worry about the little things. Just worry about the things that are going to keep you healthy is probably what she's thinking as a parent.
But it wasn't long. Kyle was able to get one of his old jobs back at the restaurant. Though Lynn was concerned, she did have some kind of comfort in knowing that his grandparents were just around the corner and they could pop in at any time.
Right, right. And things seem to be going pretty well for Kyle at this point. He starts making friends and starts going places and things like that. But in January of 2013, one of his fraternity brothers actually died unexpectedly, which was very upsetting for Kyle. And he somehow got a hold of something, and his grandparents heard a thump in the bathroom. So his grandmother knocks on the door to see if everything is okay, and there's actually no response. At this point, she hears a weird noise, and his grandfather opened the door, and Kyle was on the floor, in convulsions and frothing at the mouth.
Oh my God, that must have been terrifying.
Absolutely. I wonder what he had gotten into.
When you're young and you experience death of a friend or so, it is traumatic.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this, it's unfortunate that this was, his coping mechanism. But a lot of times, when things go rough, you're going to go to what feels good.
Right.
And unfortunately, this is what he picked.
Yeah.
Sad.
It is very sad. And within a matter of just a few moments, Kyle did come to and was all right. But of course, this must have sent a terrible shock into his grandparents.
He even said he didn't want to go to the hospital, which I would not advise that. But
wow.
He probably figured going to the hospital might lead to further problems for him.
Yeah, probably. Or maybe he didn't want his family to know the true reason why this had happened. I mean, maybe he's thinking like, oh, I can play this off that I had a seizure or something, and he doesn't want to go to the hospital and have them say it was a drug overdose or something like that.
No, around this same time of this event, Kyle was speaking to an Army recruiter, and that next morning, he was to go and have an interview and sign up. So he's looking at different alternatives here. He knows he's got a problem, and he's probably thinking, if I go into the military, there's no drug,
they'll drink.
They'll drink, but I mean, the option of prescription pills is going to be much more difficult. And he's probably thinking this is going to be an easier way for him to get clean. I just get the feel like he doesn't want to do this. He's just pulled to it.
Well, he seems like the type of person, from my opinion, that really thrives on structured environments. And, of course, that's what the Army is known for. So maybe looking to just get someplace where they're telling him what he needs to do every minute, so he doesn't have the time to make his own decisions.
Unfortunately, that interview with the recruiter never happened. Kyle began to spiral, and it was taking a toll on his grandparents.
Of course it was.
Yeah, Lynn understood and told her parents that if they needed to give him an ultimatum, some of that tough love.
Right, right, and now that he was working, he could start paying a little rent or buying groceries or something. But he said he had bills and he needed this and needed that. So, typical story. I mean, he gets his paycheck and, well, I have to get this, I have to get this, I have to get this. And they're like, you need to pay bills.
Yeah.
Like,
they're probably thinking, let's have him with a little less cash on hand to buy whatever it is he's buying.
A little less cash and a little more responsibility.
A little more responsibility, of course, yeah. Time went by and enough was enough after the efforts of the grandparents.
Right.
And Kyle ended up being back to his old ways anyways. And this was when his grandparents had asked him to find another place to live.
Makes sense. I mean, unfortunately, when you're in a family that's dealing with these things, you can only take so much and before you feel like you've exhausted everything, and maybe tough love is what they need to get better.
Kyle was able to quickly find a place and a new job that was closer.
Okay. So that was in February or March, I think.
Yeah. Well, he was working in a sports bar, and they said he was one of the best waiters they ever had. This was something he'd done his whole life, waiting, so I'm sure he took to it real quick.
Yeah, and of course, being in a sports bar, and he was athletic himself, probably knows a little bit about sports, so the environment is probably relatively fun for him to work in.
Yeah, I would imagine. But unfortunately, his employment with them didn't last long because in May of that year, they had to let him go.
Yeah, that must have been very difficult for him. But at this point, Kyle's just not functioning well at all. And of course, Kyle says it wasn't his fault, but his mother's, since she had disconnected his phone and things like that. So he had no way to find out when he was actually working.
Oh, okay. So I used to work in a restaurant before, and it was never a set schedule. And a
Oh,
lot
I
of
hate
times
that.
we would find out, it's Wednesday, and I don't know if I'm working Friday or not.
Right.
So it's probably one of those kind of situations.
Oh,
But
that's tough.
now, June 19th of 2013, Kyle was arrested for petty theft.
Yes, yep. And that was on the 19th. He actually didn't even call anybody until the 21st. So probably didn't want the reaction that his family was going to give him if he called and said, "Hey, I'm in jail again." So, but Kyle did eventually, cave and call his mother and ask if she could bail him out of jail. At this point, Lynn tells him that she'd be happy to bail him out of jail as long as he agreed to go to rehab. And that she had a place already lined up for him to go. They were just waiting for him to show up.
He said he didn't want to go to rehab, and he said he would pee in a cup every day just to get him out of there. So he's like, I'll show you I'm not doing anything. I'll do it for you, but I'm not going to go into some kind of institutionalized practice.
Right, and as difficult as this is for Lynn, she can hear the agony in his voice, during these conversations when he's asking for bail money, and the sound of desperation that he had just crushed her soul as a parent, which I can't even imagine what she was going through.
Now, Kyle had told Lynn that prior to his arrest, he had been living in a tent, and in this tent contains all of his possessions.
Right.
And, being in jail for the past few days, he was concerned that somebody was rummaging through it potentially and stealing his stuff.
Right. I mean, not exactly a secured place to have all your things, but he told her where this tent was, and his uncle Darren actually went there with a friend. And when they get there, everything was basically destroyed. It had been raining for days and things like that while he was in jail. So,
But they were able to identify that they found the correct tent because they did find a picture of Kyle's great-grandmother who died at 103 years old, kind of a matriarch of the family.
yeah, and they also found his Bible in there, which I think was very important to him.
Yep. Lynn wanted to fix this, but she didn't know what to do. She had already figured that she had tried everything. She'd gone down every avenue. She told him that she would not bail him out if he did not go to rehab. This was the only thing that they hadn't tried yet. He started yelling at her and saying, "How can you leave your son in jail?" and such. He's not really giving her much to work with here.
Right, trying to guilt her for his situation that he did, which this still actually haunts Lynn to this day, this conversation they had, because this is the last conversation she actually has with her son.
Yeah. On June 26th, Lynn had called the jail to set up visitations, and they said that he had been released.
Oh.
Yeah,
Wow.
so she's calling to see her son, but surprised to find out that he's no longer in jail.
Yeah, she was shocked that she was late. So Lynn was actually hoping to contact the judge and see if they would put him in a court-ordered drug facility or something like that. But they actually let him off because this was just his first offense, and they put him on probation.
Now, his tent was near a neighborhood that was called Pine Manor.
Yeah, I think this was like a homeless area, I guess. It's pretty much riddled with drug dealers and people like that. So there's actually a 7-Eleven on the street that enters the neighborhood, and Lynn went there one day with a picture of Kyle. The clerk said that she knew him and that he came in pretty regularly. So Lynn asked the clerk to have him call his mom if she sees him.
Lynn had also mentioned to the clerk that he could also call his Uncle Darren, who
Yeah.
didn't live terribly far from that area.
Right. I think he was only a few minutes away. So the clerk took their phone numbers, and the next weekend Lynn stopped by and asked if the clerk had seen him. And she says that she did, and she told him to call his mom, and he said he didn't have a mom anymore. Oh, that's heartbreaking.
I know. Kyle's Uncle Darren drove around the neighborhood a lot looking for him. I'm sure everybody looked like Kyle.
Yeah, I think one day he came across the kid on a bike, and it actually was Kyle. And he had this whole backpack full of stuff and things like that. So he actually talks with him for a while, and he did tell Darren to tell Lynn that he loves her.
Yeah. So maybe he's starting to come around.
I hope he is. I mean, it's nice that he's at least says some nice things about his mom at this point.
Yeah. Now this will take us to the the summer of that year of 2013, August 15th. This is really where the story kind of takes a drastic turn.
Yeah, Lynn and Gary actually take off for a long weekend to visit Gary's son in Mississippi. I think it's like a 12 or 13-hour drive. And they were there with Gary's family and his son, and they get a phone call that they didn't recognize the number of, so he ignores it. And then you get a text message saying something like, if you know Kyle Brytus, please call me back.
Gary handed the phone, of course, to Lynette,
Right.
Being his mother, and said, "You better call. I mean,
Right.
this is kind of an unusual thing going on right now."
Yeah, and I can only imagine what's going through Lynn's head. I mean, she says that she started shaking at this point, and I'm sure there's part of her that's thinking something horrible might have happened. But with his recent history, she's probably thinking that maybe
He's back in jail.
right. That's what I'm thinking too. I mean, that would be almost best case scenario at this point.
Now, Lynette quickly steps out of the diner and makes the phone call to this strange number.
Yeah, and when she calls it, the detective came on the line and asked her if she was Lynette Krager and if her son was Kyle Brytus. And she says, yeah, is Kyle okay? And the detective says, where are you? So Lynn again says, is Kyle okay? And he repeated his question again, asking where they were. So she said, well, if you must know, we're on vacation in Mississippi. He asks again, can you be more specific? Can you give me an address? And she keeps asking if Kyle's okay, and the detective wouldn't answer. So she must be getting...
She's in a dead panic.
Oh, absolutely. I can't even imagine. Oh, God.
He said he was sending the local sheriff's deputy over to the hotel in which they were staying and that he'd be meeting them shortly. So Lynette goes back into the diner and says, hey, guys, we've got to take off. We got to get back to the hotel. Something's up. There's going to be police there waiting for us.
Yeah, I think that was around like 7 p.m. too. So Lynn and Gary rushed back to the hotel and they waited. So Lynn starts making phone calls and kept calling the detective back, and the local cops never showed up. So it's actually been almost 2 hours, and she's begging the detective on the phone to tell her where her son is, or if he's still alive, or just any information. And the detective wouldn't answer her.
No, I mean, it's just one of those things I think you gotta say in person, but he eventually says that this is not typical of how they would handle things, but on the behalf of the Lee County Sheriff's Department, it is with great sadness that they report that Kyle Brytus was deceased. So he just, under the pressures of his mother, and I think she knew something was up too, and this must have been eating away at that officer that he just had to tell her.
Right. And I think Lynn actually, her first reaction is to ask the detective if this was from a drug overdose. I'm sure that this is something that she was realizing was a possibility with his recent history and things like that. And she's actually surprised when the detective says no. They actually believe that he was killed due to a gunshot. So she then asks, was it self-inflicted? Was it suicide? And they said no.
Lynn was sitting on a curb outside of the hotel with her husband, as they said they believed it to be a homicide. She told the detective that she would be traveling back to Florida as soon as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And the local sheriff department finally shows up, and Gary talked to them as Lynn was still on the phone with the other detective. And then they checked out of the hotel that night and drove straight back home. So Lynn's on her iPad basically all night long while they're driving back, trying to find any news stories or things like that about the body that they found that what ended up being Kyle. But she just kept reading over and over just the same lack of information, just that they had found a body and yada yada. And she says, of course, the media is sensationalizing the story, which doesn't help
Anything.
Now,
Lynn and Gary arrived back home around 8:30 in the morning. She then calls the detective to tell them that she was home. They come and interview both of them immediately.
Right.
Try to get some kind of information as to the background of Kyle and what might have led up to this.
Right. And the detectives don't really have a ton of leads from what I understand, but Lynn says that she feels, and I would agree with her because this happens in a lot of cases, that the police basically just look at it like another drug addict, another drug crime or something like that. Not necessarily a top priority of theirs to solve this, which is very unfortunate because this family certainly deserves justice.
Yeah, I hate this because you do see that all the time. These people that are, heavy into drugs or even prostitution or so, they are definitely marginalized. It's almost like they're put into their own category of people that we don't really need to look for.
Right. Or
Which I hate to say.
if we have the time, we will, but it's not a priority. But Lynn has actually been told from the detectives over and over again that because they were having torrential downpours for a couple of days, that there wasn't a whole lot of evidence left at the crime scene. They can't even tell Lynn if he was killed there in the field or if that's just where his body was dumped. So
You almost wonder if the detectives did enough.
I'd say no, but they also said that they couldn't tell how long he had been dead. So, they're not giving her very much information at all.
So, of course, Lynn ends up asking the coroner for the toxicology reports, but because this is an open case, they're unable to give her any information.
Right, and the detective said a few weeks later that he had learned more about the heroin trade in the Pine Manor area, and Kyle had actually turned to heroin from his oxy addiction, which is very common for people who get addicted to painkillers.
Much cheaper.
Heroin's much cheaper and easier for them to get a hold of. So,
They also say that Kyle was known in the area, specifically in the local pawn shops. That tells you that he might have been, maybe stealing or doing things to support his habit.
Right. And his arrest for petty theft, actually, she finds out was from a Walmart. He actually found a receipt in the parking lot and went into the store, grabbed the item off the shelf that the receipt was for, tried to go into customer service with that receipt to get cash for it. Almost pretty clever, but
yeah,
a store like Walmart, they've seen it all.
They've seen it. They know what to do. Now, on August 24th, Kyle's family has a celebration of life for him. There was close to 150 people that were crammed into a small chapel at the funeral home. There was even standing room outside the hallway.
Wow.
That just gives you an idea how impactful Kyle was on the people that he was around, especially during the days that he was sober.
A lot of Kyle's friends have actually become sober since his death, kind of a wake-up call to them, which is good. And some of Kyle's fraternity brothers actually had traveled from Boca Raton, and they raised the glass to him after the ceremony, and nice things like that, and kind of good stories to remember him by. I think that it's good that some of his former classmates and whatnot reach out to Lynn and tell her these good stories, because I'm sure they're nice for her to hear.
But unfortunately, to this day, the case of Kyle Brytus is still open. Nobody's come forward with any information. Lynette's still left wondering what happened to her son.
Yeah, and she deserves, the closure that would come with that. I mean, if you do have any info on the case, call the Lee County Sheriff's Office. I believe their phone number is 239-477-1830. And I'm sure they'll be happy to take your tip and put it on a back desk somewhere, but at least put it out there, give them some information.
I gotta say, man, I'm looking up the Lee County Sheriff's Office on my phone. They got a 1.4 star rating.
Yeah, so it sounds like that they're not.
It doesn't. I mean, I'm not gonna trash talk them. I don't know. I'm far from Florida, but I don't know. That doesn't sound right.
I will say though, not many people are gonna give a police department good ratings, especially half those reviews are probably people who got arrested by them. But still, I don't know. What do you think? Do you think this is drug related, or do you think that maybe he was in the wrong place, or?
Well, to be honest, my instinct says it's probably drug related. He was living a hard life on the streets. The pawn shop owners and all that knew him. He was in and out of things that he shouldn't have been in and out of.
Right, hanging with seedy people in that area for sure. So
sometimes, when you live a hard life, it catches up to you, and it can happen at any time, at any instant. I feel like the investigators. I mean, and again, I don't know, but I feel like they went to the crime scene. They just did a quick sweep, looked for things. Let's see if we can find a bullet or casing, or
probably
see what we can find.
Yada yada, and just moving on from it.
I feel like that's it. To be honest, and it's really sad because you watch the videos with Lynn in it, and you can just see how heartbroken this woman is, even still to this day.
This was a sad case. I mean, you see it when Kyle was young. He had so much potential. I mean, there's so much potential, and unfortunately, addiction hit him, and he couldn't get out of it.
Yeah, just it consumed him. It's terrible, But of all the stories that we've done, man, this is the number one case that I hope gets solved.
Yeah, I agree.
I really, really, really do.
Delphi for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. This one in Delphi because it hits home when you're corresponding with a parent and you can sense the pain that she's feeling just through her emails. Yeah. It's terrible.
And, I know people that I went to school with or whatnot in this area that have been addicted to heroin and things like that. And it's really sad to see what happens to these people when the drugs take over their life. I know a few people that I know have passed away from overdoses, and it brings you in contact with people that you really shouldn't be.
Right. So once again, before we conclude all this, I just want to say, if anybody listening knows anything about what happened to Kyle, please come forward, because it is time, and it'll make you feel better to get it off your chest. But it's got to be, something's got to come of this.
Yeah.
And we're going to do our best here at the podcast to kind of get the word out. If you're in Florida and you're listening to this, do us a favor, do Kyle a favor, do his mom a favor, and just could you reshare our post and our page in this episode. We want to get this episode out onto as many ears as possible, and because we're going to be running a social media campaign to really try to ramp up any information known in regards to this case.
And you can also get a hold of his mom on social media as well. I know she's on Instagram at Justice for Kyle Brytus.
Yes.
So, yeah, you can do that. And you can also always get a hold of us on our social medias, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, at the Rigor Mortis Podcast, as well as our Gmail at the Rigor Mortis Podcast at gmail.com.
If you want to follow us individually for a little extra content to our show, you can find me on all things social media at Dr. Scully Fingers.
Yep, and I'm on Instagram on Rigor Mortis _JLew, JLEW.
Yeah, so once again, everybody, thank you for listening. And if you have any tips, anything to add to this story, please let us know.
Absolutely.
Till next time.
It's tough, but then again, I know those were happy times.
For the first time in 10 years, Lynn Krieger comes back to Fort Myers High School, where her little boy excelled.
I even choked up a little just pulling in the driveway.
She remembers her son Kyle as a bookworm. After he graduated high school, he received thousands of dollars worth of scholarships.
Straight A's all the time, and he was graduated with honors.
But more than that, she remembers his competitive spirit. He was captain of the cross-country team.
He just said he just really enjoyed it because it cleared his head.
He won races across the state, placing first time and time again.
He just felt free.
It's here at Fort Myers High School where Kyle Brytus shined. His mother said he made fantastic grades and he was a star athlete. But it's after high school where all the trouble started.
We don't know exactly why, but he turned to drugs.
Kyle attended Florida Atlantic University in Boca Raton. That's where his addiction to oxycodone quickly took over his life, forcing him to move back home. You saw your son go from a fantastic student, an athlete, to turning into a drug addict.
I play in my head all the time. How could this happen? I don't know.
Kyle began to stay with friends in Pine Manor, and that's when he started to get in trouble with the law. At the age of 25, he was arrested in June of 2013 and called his mom for help.
My last conversation basically telling him no, I couldn't help him because I wasn't going to pay to get him out unless he went to the facility.
Kyle refused rehab, and the two never spoke again. 3 months later, August 15th, 2013, Lynn and her husband were visiting Mississippi when the phone rang. The call was from a Lee County deputy.
I kept asking them, could you please tell me, is my son alive?
Kyle's body was found here in Lehigh Acres. Deputies say he was murdered. Who killed him is still a mystery.
We believe that there are people out there who know what happened to Kyle.
Captain William Murphy is with the Lee County Sheriff's Office and is overlooking Kyle's case.
It is reaching that point where it may be going cold without some assistance.
But until we actually find out who did this, I won't have any closure.
An increased reward in a brand new billboard just put up over Pine Manor hopes to catch the right person's attention. But for the time being, Lynn remembers her little boy who traveled to South America on mission trips, who brought candy to school to share with friends, and who would rearrange his furniture almost weekly. She remembers him in the most creative way. She listens to the music he would listen to. She still has Kyle's iPod.
I'll listen to a song just for him, that's how I remember him.